Well, this took a while. Of course it did. We had to find secrets. Given we talk about wrestling so much, I quite enjoyed it, apart from the harsh reminder that our favorite pastime can be awful here and there. I mean, we know this, but you still have some awful times. You're also going to get a healthy dose of trivia here too, and just as a hook, there's one entry you won't believe. It's totally wild. So let's get ourselves settled and reveal one secret from every year in WWE history. Number 43, 1982, and Vince McMahon played along at first. 3 months after Vince McMahon had bought the WWF from his dad, he promoted an NWA World title match between Ric Flair and Buddy Rose in the Portland territories. I'm not making this up either, you can see it on the YouTube. The reason this is so historical is because it shows, while he did have a grand plan of cutting everybody else out, it's not like he got the keys and started right away. He played somewhat of a long game. McMahon even acts like he shall keep the old system in place, but man, just go and look and listen to his face and voice. He didn't mean a word of it, although it is strange to hear him describe Flair as the world champion. I mean, not only did the World Wrestling Federation have their own guy, but he said the world's part too, which was very much NWA speak. And yes, it is weird. I've been saying this for ages. Just say world. Number 42, 1983, and the real reason Jimmy Snuka was demoted. Jimmy Snuka's 1983 was filled with controversy as then girlfriend Nancy Argentino passed away, with many people pointing the finger of blame at Snuka himself. If you've never looked into this, it's a harrowing read. The facts are not good. If it happened today, there would be a far bigger outcry, but in the early 80s, pro wrestling existed in this weird bubble where the mainstream media didn't care about what they did. Therefore, nobody really talked about it. It's been said many fans would scream this at Jimmy as his career continued, and let's not forget his now famous Madison Square Garden steel cage splash happened later in the year in October. It was like nothing had gone down. He was actually wrestling 3 days after the incident, so there was no issue with him internally, but that does pose the question as to why he wasn't featured as once was suggested. Well, I'll tell you. Around this time, Jimmy Snuka turned 40 years old, and as we are going to learn, as soon as you enter your 5th decade, Vince McMahon thinks you're done, so to the side, you are pushed. How crazy is that too? I think our priorities may have been backwards. Number 41, 1984, and the first Bulldog. It's a closed shop now. If you utter the name Bulldog in any wrestling circle, Davey Boy Smith's name will come up. There's nothing wrong with this, as the man is a legend, even more so because he made it onto American TV as an Englishman when that was next to impossible. He was a beast. He certainly didn't come up with that nickname though, as even within the WWE, he wasn't the first to use it. That honor goes to Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, a man who these days often does the round due to his crazy power slam he used to do. You should try and see this today if you never have. The ease in which he manhandles people, it is quite something. Sawyer's career highlights actually came outside of the WWF when he was wrestling for Georgia and Texas, and his time under Vince McMahon was a little more than 2 months. It's a shame, really. He was a great heel, but Vince thought he was too short. Of course he did. It was during this run where, inspired by Mad Dog Vachon, that he was dubbed the Bulldog, though. This is why when he was inducted into the Legacy Wing of the Hall of Fame in 2021, he was called this. And yes, the internet got mad. Now I do get that, as he was the Bulldog for a grand total of 7 matches, but still, you can't rewrite history. This is where it all started, and who knows? Maybe Davey Boy needed this to get the idea in the first place. Bless them both. Number 40, 1985, and the famous commentator you've definitely heard of. So I'm not trying to say that her lending her celebrity to the WWF at the time was as big as it was for Mr. T or Cyndi Lauper. That would be crazy. But guess who was once on the call for the World Wrestling Federation? Oprah Winfrey. Now this was super niche as it was for a WWF broadcast on the AM Chicago regional talk show, but still, Winfrey was on the rise at this point, and I suppose as the WWF was too, it made sense to try and combine them both. You'll be shocked to hear this wasn't really Oprah's forte, however. Not her fault. Being an announcer takes its own brand of skill. My favourite part is that she's clearly been thrown in the deep end, as all she does is ask her co-commentator questions. Mostly, what the flub is going on? Winfrey still had some bangers, such as noting it was nice that tag teams had another guy ready to go, because the other could take a rest, and that wrestlers sweat a lot. I mean, she's not wrong, they do. When the action spilled to the outside too and the referee lost control, Oprah wondered if anything was allowed to go in wrestling, and that rules. I love non-fans watching. They noticed all the quirks instantly. Whether or not she enjoyed this, I do not know, but fair play to throwing herself into the madness. What's telling is she never did it again, though after a while she was going to be way bigger than sports entertainment anyway. Number 39, 1986, and a little-known first meeting. At WrestleMania 10, Owen Hart defeated brother Bret in one of the best opening matches ever. The technicality is off the chain, and seeing the Hitman get more and more annoyed at his sibling is great. Tied directly into the fight, gave us a layered story. It is really, really good. The WWF also sold it as a first-time meeting of these two, aside from scraps when they were children. But surprise, surprise, this wasn't true. Just good old-fashioned wrestling lies. Because if we go back to 1986, you will see a tag team match between these two, as Owen is called Owen James and teaming with SD Jones. They are indeed taking on the Hart Foundation though, so he had bro versus bro, and Owen lost. Of course he did. This was part of a tryout as the powers that be wanted to see if they had another Hart prodigy on their hands. I can tell you now they did. He still wasn't signed to a deal, however, which was weird because he was clearly ahead of the game. I would compare it to something like Kurt Angle in the late 90s. That's the kind of level Owen was already showing despite being a rookie. Turned out it was classic wrestling politics because, as Dave Meltzer wrote in The Observer at the time, those in the back felt like Owen outshone them, so went to task in shutting him down. Of course they did. What a waste of life. It wouldn't be the first time this happened either, because you're damned if you do, and you are damned if you don't. Number 39, 1987 saw Demolition have more than 3 members. Demolition have got to be one of the best tag teams ever who are not in the Hall of Fame. Ties into a concussion lawsuit against WWE, which makes things difficult, but now we're in a new era, hopefully that is going to change. They deserve it. It is such an amazing story as the WWF created the duo because they couldn't hire the Road Warriors, and they wanted a team like that. So let's just rip off Hawk and Animal, but we can call them Smash and Axe. But look, they clicked, and people love these guys. The first time they had the tag team titles, they broke records by holding them for 478 days. And I suppose when we got to 1990, management felt like they needed to be freshened up, and we added Crush to the mix. This was also done to help Axe, who was struggling with injuries at the time, and Crush soon got dubbed as the controversial third member. Thing is, it wasn't true. Because if we go back to day one, Smash originally was played by Moondog Rex. He only lasted 3 matches because even though he worked under a mask, everybody knew who it was. Moondog had been around for ages, so management realized it wasn't going to fly. It was way too distracting. Given the aim was to generate the success of the Road Warriors, he had to go, but hey, he was soon repackaged and carried on for a little longer. It did work though. Demolition are all time. Number 37, 1988, and look who's jobbing. In 2007, Steve Blackman returned to Raw for a cameo and people were stunned. It was like he had been frozen in ice for a few years. The man hadn't aged at all. He looked great. It also reminded people of the Attitude Era and this guy. He was on paper the most generic dude ever, but there was something about Steve that people loved. I was one of them. He was just the best and looked like he could kill you. What nobody realizes is that Blackman had been going since the 80s and actually popped up in the WWF during the so-called Golden Era. His career was then derailed as during a South Africa tour in 1989, he got really sick and almost died. No wonder he had to step away. This wasn't the case a year prior though, as Steve was indeed teaming with Battle Cat and Outbreak Jack to face Haku, High Chief Affy, and Tama on WWF Superstars. Of course, he was on the losing side, but still, I am not sure anybody knows this, and it goes to show the man has been smashing it for decades. Number 36, 1989's little-known racism scandal. The backstage scene in the 80s was not a good place for the WWF. There was the steroid scandal, which went to trial, and the Ring Boys accusation, which is just a horrible read. Things were happening which most definitely shouldn't have been. These did make national headlines because of how awful they were, but there was the third that went under the radar. It's just as bad. Because during a European tour in 1989, Coco Beware had a falling out with executive named Jim Troy. It started off as a verbal row, but when Troy allegedly started being racist, it got physical. Obviously, you can't do that. Bruce Pritchard discussed this on his podcast, and while he didn't address the racial side of things, he did describe Troy as a former ice hockey pro who felt the need to let everybody know he could beat up the locker room. What an idiot. I suppose this was his testing ground because reports from the time described the scene after as a proper bloodbath. There was mess everywhere. Amazingly, Coco was fired at first before more details came to light. He was then swiftly rehired as Jim was forced to resign, and good. I've already said this, you can't do that stuff. Number 35, 1990 and the failed tryouts. So if these had worked out, the landscape of pro wrestling as we know it today would have been vastly different. Because our brains do tell us now that 19's wrestling was totally changed by 2 major people. Eric Bischoff and Paul Heyman. Bischoff was the guy who looked to Japan when he was in charge of WCW to create the NWO storyline, whereas Heyman's ECW took the rulebook and threw it out the window. If you wanted to see the evolution of sports entertainment for a modern audience, it was likely happening here. That's why all the other promotions swiftly stole their ideas. If the WWE had been astute to this, though, they could have actually stopped it, because both guys were auditioned for different roles long before any of this kicked off. In 1990, Eric was given a tryout as an announcer for the company, but he didn't get it. Bischoff himself has said he wasn't ready or very good at the time, but hey, this is how we learn. And he did alright off the back of it. There's also plenty of rumors that Paul had the same opportunity with the same fate, and imagine we'd gone the other way. The WWF could have stopped their competition long before it was ever a thing. Who knows what that looks like? And now we shall never know. Number 34, 1991, and the secret abandoned return. In early 1991, Brutus the Barber Beefcake made his accidentally hilarious return to the WWF. It was actually quite serious because 6 months prior he had destroyed his entire face thanks to a parasailing accident. It was so bad he needed help breathing. That is terrifying. Brutus also needed so much fix he was basically more metal than man, and when he was healed, the WWF invited him back. The problem is he would have to work under a mask because he needed serious protection. We decided to tie this in and make Beefcake some sort of superhero, because any time a heel like Earthquake or Rick Martel tried to cheat, he would run in and headbutt them, and this hurt because of said mask. The sad funny side comes into play because you will never have seen these. Apparently they look so bad, the WWF never decided to wear them. Yep. Even the family crowds dismissed them, which is not good. What a horrible time this must have been for Ed Leslie. He had just been through hell, then he had to deal with this. It must have been difficult enough to return anyway, then your first angle is a bust. Nobody deserves that. Number 33, 1992, and the worst gimmick ever. No, it's not the gobbledygooker, but you can argue that. You wouldn't get much pushback from me. When we do get into the nitty-gritty, though, there is someone that could even rival our colourful turkey friend. You may know him best as WCW's Roadblock, but we don't talk about his 1992 and when he signed for the WWF as the Retriever. Oh, yes. Instantly, I'm sure you're thinking about the real-life Joe D'Acquisito being a dog, but surely not, right? Even with all the other nonsense Vince McMahon came up with, a sports entertainment dog who's actually a man is too much. Sadly, there's no footage that exists, so we can't say for sure, but look at this. If we go to Cage Match, we can find a solitary match where Brian Costello took on the Golden Retriever, managed by the Genius. So I'm sorry, he was definitely made out to be a mutt. That name is way too close. The fact you can't see this likely means even the WWF knew what they had done, but please, if you have any more knowledge, let me know. I am desperate to get it confirmed, especially because this guy ain't ever main eventing WrestleMania. What a way to be brought in. Number 32, 1993, and Sabu's mad WWF tryout. Sabu was integral to ECW's success. His craziness in many ways summed up what the promotion was all about, because you never knew what he was going to do. The man was nuts. In October 1993, though, we almost changed the timeline because, yeah, he had a tryout with the WWF. Amazingly, his opponent for that was Scott Taylor, or the future Scotty 2 Hottie, and apparently this didn't go well at all. He was not asked to come back for a round 2. The irony was, 1 year later, Sabu had become so popular within wrestling, a We Want Sabu sign made it to a house show. Road agent Jack Lanza was so mad about this, he went into the stands and confiscated it. That's how the upper brass felt about the homicidal maniac. It's also how fast things can change in wrestling, however, and that's why you just never know. 31, 1994, and the exposing of the business. So we all knew the deal anyway in 1994, but the reason we should talk about this is because it's pre-Brian Pillman loose cannon. It meant that anything in mainstream pro wrestling had still been mostly presented as legitimate competition when we got to the 26th September episode of Raw. It came during a syndicated version of the broadcast, so it was niche, but a Belgian commentator decided he was done with being employed, so literally told the audience what they were seeing is fake. He really lost it too, talking about baby faces and heels, and if you need a comparison, it would be like Michael Cole telling you that Jimmy and Jey Uso still love each other really. They're only fighting because the story says they should. This is another tale where we don't know much more because the only info was a few sentences in the Wrestling Observer newsletter. And I mean, when it comes down to it, I suppose people sometimes just go crazy. Number 30, 1995, and Triple H's difficult debut. The Hunter S. Helmsley gimmick was very of its time. Everybody had to have some kind of ridiculous persona during the mid-90s, so as Triple H was really named Paul Levesque, we made him a Greenwich Blue Blood. Boo him because he has money. It was sort of an updated $1 Million Man, but played way more cartoony, and it most definitely had a ceiling. That's why a few years after, Hunter totally reinvented himself. It went so well, he is now in charge of the whole thing, and that was always his plan. By the early 2000s, the game was sitting in production meetings. It worked out very well. It's also why he doesn't want to talk about his first ever opponent in the WWE, because he fought Buck Zomhof, who would later be convicted as a sex offender. That is awful. Number 29, 1996, and the House Show from Hell. The WWF roster in 1996 wasn't very good. The company was still trying to figure it all out after the 80s boom, and this is when they chose to make every wrestler have another job. We've talked about it, it was weird. It also meant there were more bad matches on TV than good ones, and one particular house show was apparently terrible. Happening in June when the company was in Kentucky, this went especially bad, because after some plane delays, barely anybody was able to get to the event. It meant that Aldo Dantoya and Duke the Dumpster Droese had to stall for 45 minutes for others to try and catch up. 45 minutes. We even had to split this into 2 matches as we were getting updates in real time. And get this, Duke turned heel in the first one to justify round 2. That actually sounds really good. The Angry Garbage Man. They were genuinely going to go another 15 minutes when everybody else turned up, and I'm sure they were pretty pleased about this. They're not stupid. Number 28, 1997, and Hammer Time. Nepotism in wrestling is everywhere. Hell, it dominates all forms of entertainment because if your mum and dad is successful, why wouldn't you use this? I get it. Sometimes you also have sway given your status, and in 1997, one Mark Merrow found himself in this position. He had been brought in as somebody the WWF wanted to push, and before they changed all that, he recommended a wrestler to the office, Van Hammer. Now, Hammer had quite the name based on his WCW run, but he was kind of massive and kind of clumsy. The dude fell over a lot, and I get that. I go down all the time. No one ever thought he would get into the World Wrestling Federation, though, and he didn't. He didn't pass the tryout because even the body-obsessed Vince McMahon realized it wasn't a good fit. Maybe this is why they stopped getting behind Mark II, but hey, at least he went to bat for his friend. Number 27, 1998, and Underage Love. Anytime I talk about the Attitude Era, I try to remind you that some of it was terrible. This is a case in point. The Kai Tai vs. Val Venus feud was mad anyway because Vince Russo decided an episode of Raw should end with the Japanese group trying to cut off Val's penis. Who was this for? Do you want to know why they were beefing to begin with too? Because Venus had slept with manager Yamaguchi-san's wife, and therefore his groin must be removed. The thing is, when the internet looked into this, the person playing the wife role was only 17. This begs the question then why the WWE thought it was okay to film a segment where she shared a bed with Val. This is unreal. There was also plenty of awful, scantily clad shots of her, which were bad anyway and worse now, and some of the things Jerry Lawler said on commentary. And sure, maybe some people didn't know her age, but no, just no, we should never have done this, and it deserves way more fuss even today. It totally crossed the line. Number 26, 1999, and Gorilla Monsoon, who was still doing commentary. I do not remember this. Could be because the jump from WWF in 1995 to 1999 was so vast, it's hard to ever see those from yesteryear involved with the new production. It's why if I told you King Mabel fought Ken Shamrock a year prior to this, you'd say no way, but trust me, he did. It was the same for Gorilla Monsoon because here and there throughout the year, he did indeed still do some announcing. Which rocks, by the way. Gorilla is the best. It also meant he got to give his opinion on Vince McMahon being in the Royal Rumble, and once called him over his head and arrogant. People would still call Monsoon the president as well, which is just a lovely Easter egg. And I tell you, nobody will ever do it like Gorilla. Number 25, 2000, and the Explosion match. At WrestleMania 16, the WWF decided to get as many wrestlers on the show as possible. That's nice in a way, but we only got one singles match and got random fights like Rikishi and Kane taking on X-Pac and the Road Dogg. I'm not sure that's Mania worthy, but what do I know? It was good that Big Keish got the nod as he was getting crazy over, but at one point we were just going to do X-Pac versus Kane, who had been feuding for ages. When that was on the cards too, management actually considered doing an exploding death match. Yep. I mean, it was the year 2000s and mad stipulations were all over the place. Ultimately, they decided there was no way to pull it off, and thank goodness for one Sean Waltman. Given their characters, you have to imagine he would have been the guy getting blown up all over the place. I think even though the final match was a bit drab, this was still the better choice, because the way I look at it, we don't need to explode wrestlers. Number 24, 2001, Shane McMahon got weird. I'm not sure why this happened, but we need to delete it. It's It's all very bizarre. But back in 1999, Shane and Stephanie McMahon appeared on Off the Record, and for some reason host Michael Landsberg decided to ask if Steph would ever follow in Deborah's footsteps. When they asked to elaborate, he just said puppies. Good grief. Shane then butted in and spoke on behalf of his sister's breasts and said they were cute. This is the worst thing ever. Obviously, eventually, Stephanie did get this surgery, which was often referenced on Raw, but when Shane appeared on the Opie and Anthony show in 2001, he was once again asked about this. Can you please just stop it? For some reason, Shane O never gave a damn, and his response was that Steph's breasts were two great excuses to tune into SmackDown. Now please take me home because I don't want to be here anymore. And I get it was a different time at the turn of the century, but one rule I would like to keep is not saying creepy things about your siblings. That to me feels like a keeper no matter what. Number 23, 2002, and Albert loses it. I mean, we called him Prince Albert. If you don't know what that means, Google it, but get ready to delete your history instantly. Don't understand why we do this to wrestlers. It's not fair. It's also a shame as the real-life Matt Bloom proved time and time again he was a big dude that could move, but this gimmick cursed him. Fans picked up on it instantly and loved chanting Albert at the guy like it was the episode of The Simpsons. This happened all the time before the crowd added an extra one to boot. Shave your back. Yep, Albert was a hairy so-and-so, and as he didn't razor this off, we all just yelled at him. According to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, though, in 2002, during a house show, Albert had enough of this, so when the crowd wouldn't shut up, he mooned them. I know it was slightly after the fact, but the Attitude Era and the fallout was just wild. Imagine if somebody like Omos did this today too. Not sure you should be showing your ass no matter what. You're gonna get in trouble. Number 22, 2003, and the burial of Edge. Even though he just did what he was told. Wrestling. It's fair to say that business wasn't as good as it had been from 2002 onwards, no matter what the WWF tried. The bubble had just burst, this happens. We even did Hogan versus Flair on free TV. That led to Brock Lesnar whooping Hulk as somebody thought maybe new stars would fare better, but when that also struggled, we started to throw things at the wall right into 2003. The real issue is that no one could figure out what to do with those who were finally coming through, so the powers that be actually asked these folk to submit weekly reports. That's right. Tell us what we can do better and more creatively. All these people included Edge, who decided to jump right in and asked repeatedly why everything he did made no sense. He also wanted to know what the long-term idea was, and as we know, there was none. We were booking by the seat of our pants, which was the issue. Turned out WWE didn't actually want to hear this anyway because they just wanted everything to be great. According to the 16th June Wrestling Observer, Adam Copeland felt this because after reading Edge's notes, Johnny Laurinaitis replied and said, "Really, you should be more positive." That's amazing. Another way to put it would just be, don't give us feedback. And after a few weeks, this charade was killed. It was a waste of time anyway. Nobody was ever going to read those notes. Number 21, 2004, and the John Cena shock. Or the fact that WWE had lost faith in him. They don't talk about this today now, do they? We all know that 2 years prior, Cena was in trouble as management didn't get him after he debuted against Kurt Angle. They wanted more ruthless aggression, and when they didn't get it, decided John was just another body guy. There's nothing they can do with him. Now actually, Cena was doing fine, but that's not a fun of a story in either way. Eventually, Stephanie McMahon saw him freestyling on a bus, told him to do it on TV, and the rest is history. One of the most important guys ever in WWE history. The thing is, even after this, there were some hurdles. We go back to the Wrestling Observer newsletter from May 2004, where it was reported after a great reaction at Madison Square Garden, there was now an internal backlash against Cena. Ruh-roh. Steve Meltzer had more, as apparently one veteran didn't think John's ring work was up to where it needed to be, and if anything, he'd been plucked from developmental too early. Furthermore, he didn't seem to be improving on the road. Now you can have your guesses as to who this was, but my word were they wrong. Whatever Cena was doing totally worked, and fans were lapping it up. This is because moves are not important, and it's how and when you do them. Go and listen to anyone talk about John, and they all agree that is his forte. Dare I say, this was just stupid wrestling politics rearing its head again. Number 20, 2005, and the Triple H story. So this was the period where everybody got mad at Triple H. They felt like he held titles too long and should have put the likes of RVD, Jeff Hardy, and Booker T over. There's no point getting too in-depth into it now. It's a forever conversation right up to WrestleMania 32 and that Sting match. That one was ridiculous. Just let Sting win. Rob Van Dam and Jeff Hardy are the real chats to be had because, yeah, if we had changed their narrative a little bit, who knows where they'd be. But at the same time, both ran into personal issues too. Could have made things more problematic for the company. So see, this can just go on and on. The Booker T one is far easier because we did get to WrestleMania, which is a big deal, but the ending to that was just bad. Booker should have destroyed the awful people known as Triple H and Ric Flair, as that was part of the story. It was a total mistake. In 2005, he went and did this by accident though, which makes it way funnier, especially because it happened at the Mr. Olympia contest. Paul Levesque had started attending these as a big bodybuilding fan, but of course wrestling questions would be brought up. Therefore, when he was asked why Heat regular Johnny Parisi wasn't getting a bigger push, Trips replied, "I don't know who that is." Whoops. Better still, this was Johnny Swinger, who is here, there, and everywhere else these days. I suppose you can't be aware of everyone. Number 19, 2006, and the UFC star. These days, the WWE loves athletes. They even have the NIL program where they go around the USA looking for college standouts who may be able to make it as pro wrestlers. There's pros and cons to this, but hey, may as well do it. Find one with a personality and it could be money. Look at Trick Williams. That dude is likely going to main event WrestleMania one day. The roots of this do go all the way back to the early 2000s where Gerald Briscoe had this role. He would go to different schools and watch these people perform to see if they had what it takes. According to Dave Meltzer, one person Gerald did lay his eyes on was an NCAA Division I collegiate national champion named Ben Askren. That may ring a bell. Briscoe was keen as Ben had charisma, but the worry was his size. He knew what Vince McMahon wanted and he wasn't sure Askren was big enough to make a splash. They didn't make an offer. As we now know, Askren would make it all the way to the UFC and got over thanks to his personality, although it didn't go all his way. In 2019, he got whooped by George Masvidal after a famous war of words. Ben would then do interviews saying that MMA was a crap career and that maybe one day he could even beat the undefeated Khabib. Sounds like a pro wrestler to me, and back in 2006, my gosh, it was exactly what WWE needed. Number 18, 2007, and Vince hates developmental. By 2007, OVW was all over the place. There had been a time under Jim Cornette where it was doing pretty well, and even when Paul Heyman stepped in, he helped along the likes of CM Punk. Once they were out the door though, the whole thing basically collapsed, and within a year, the relationship between the two had been totally killed off. Instead, WWE went to Deep South Wrestling for their budding new recruits where Jody Hamilton was in charge. Just go and read about what happened there, however. The rumor was they forgot to even book talent on shows to help them grow. Whoops. Bill DeMott was the head trainer who decided the old school ways had to be adhered to, so just pushed his trainees way too hard and often, it was said, humiliated them. There's some mad stories about stink faces. We'll leave it there. It was so bad WWE shut it all down, and this was done all cloak and dagger. A group led by John Laurinaitis got in the building and took anything of WWE out of there. They weren't going back. McMahon was so appalled by all of this, he declared they didn't need such a system, so gave up on the whole thing for a few years. Soon became clear you do need such help, which is when we got FCW, which soon became NXT. You know the rest. Number 17, 2008, and the return of Kurt Angle. Almost. Obviously, this didn't happen. In our timeline, he left WWE in 2006 and returned in 2017. And by that point, even Angle will tell you he was broken down. The man had given so much, it was ridiculous. The highlight of round 2 was definitely the WrestleMania match where he teamed with Ronda Rousey to fight Triple H and Stephanie McMahon. And if you want to know why he was wrecked, go and watch his TNA run. Kurt was possessed during this period of his career. It really was quite incredible. People still get sad about the fact Baron Corbin retired him, but we've talked about that before. There's only one person to blame. But we may have had way more Angle in the WWE if a creative idea was followed up on. Overtures were made in 2008 to test the waters, I suppose because Kurt was doing so well, until the company thought better of it. When Angle left, he was dealing with some serious personal issues, and they weren't entirely sure he was past all that. It's a shame in many ways, because if this had happened, we could have got the likes of Kurt Angle versus Daniel Bryan or CM Punk. Let's not think about it. Number 16, 2009's big WrestleMania match. At WrestleMania 25, we got one of the best matches of all time. Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker stole the show and is still spoken of today, but here's the twist. Even though we got the sequel 12 months on, it almost didn't happen at all. For there was talk early on that Taker should face Chris Jericho on this evening in case Edge wasn't back from injury in time. To be fair, this was almost immediately abandoned and was more of a what-if deal, and besides, the rated R superstar did make it back, and surprised us all at the Royal Rumble. Furthermore, Michaels was telling anyone who would listen that he was done because the grind had become too much, so yeah. I'm sure officials were looking for anyone and everyone. Given that WWE wanted Shawn not to leave, they sort of just ignored this, and the real ridiculous nature is that we did do Taker vs Jericho on SmackDown. Chris has talked about this as well and how him and the Dead Man barely had any matches, so that is an oversight. Done at the show of shows with the right build, it may have actually have been pretty damn good. Number 15, 2010, and the Abandoned Stable. When something gets hot in wrestling, people follow the trend. I don't think this is a bad idea, because it's like Gears of War's active reload. Everybody should steal it. WWE were always happy to do this, which is why we did have the Legacy group, who were essentially based off Evolution, and they were based off DX. There's varying levels of success, but that's where it all came from. Even X Factor were born out of hoping to emulate this. Problem there was they were treated like jokes. Legacy was an interesting one, as we hoped that Randy Orton as the leader could elevate Ted DiBiase Jr. and Cody Rhodes, but this was all messed up. WWE thought Ted was the big star here, and Rhodes was nothing more than a mid-carder. You got this wrong. They did get their big triple threat match at WrestleMania 26, but it was okay at best. But because we were dedicated to Ted, after this, he was meant to get a brand new group of his own. That would put him in the Orton position, which would give him some credibility, I suppose. But there was the error. When Triple H did this in Evolution or Randy after him, they were already established. DiBiase was anything but, so there were obvious cracks. I suppose management knew this as it never happened, and honestly, his underlings were going to be his brother Brett and Joe Hennig, so maybe this was actually all about nepotism. Number 14, 2011, and the Zack Ryder madness. This was so dumb. If anybody ever needed evidence that the brass ring didn't exist, go back and watch Zack Ryder in 2011. As he wasn't getting any on-screen opportunities, he went and made a YouTube show to try and get himself over, and man, he totally smashed it. Long Island IZ was ahead of the curve with this type of content, and people loved it. They also wanted to see it get featured more on WWE TV, so made their voices heard, but in many ways was the worst thing possible. It's almost like the company were mad this happened and even madder that we liked him, so they took Ryder and made him do really silly things. He was given the US title, but no pomp and circumstance to go along with that, and had his girlfriend Eve Torres cheat on him with John Cena. Then he got thrown off the entrance ramp. It was brutal. Such was Vince's rage about all this, he allegedly even got mad about a Zack t-shirt, which read, "Take care, spike your hair." And why was this so egregious? Because TNA was airing on Spike at the time. That is crazy behavior. It got worse as my man wanted to pull the entire merch line until relenting. I really hope it's because someone told him, "Hey boss, you being bonkers." Number 13, 2012, and Daniel Bryan. WrestleMania 28, Sheamus killed Daniel Bryan. I find it hard to get mad now because it sent Bryan to the WWE title, but at the time this was silly. Wrestling fans were not happy. This could also be due to the fact Daniel was called a nerd constantly throughout this run, mostly because Vince McMahon liked to bully him. I mean, he couldn't even believe that Bryan was a vegan. How on earth can you be a real man and not eat meat? There has been some more interesting discourse since then, mostly as hindsight is a powerful tool. For example, rather than some stupid new name, Daniel Bryan was a nod to his indie career. It doesn't happen all that much. Even though The Miz was his mentor, Bryan did beat him on pay-per-view, and look, he had been the world heavyweight champion. Therefore, the reasoning behind this 18-second squash was more to help Sheamus than to ruin Daniel. Maybe it was a bit of both. To be fair, WWE claimed this was meant to be an homage to Bruno Sammartino, who won his maiden title in under a minute. I suppose we'll never know, and again, it all worked out. Number 12, 2013, and the cooling of the Shield. So we have touched on something similar in this list with John Cena, and yep, it happened with the Shield too. When you think about it, it's not too surprising because it all comes down to how much Vince McMahon loved Roman Reigns. He didn't care that he was getting booed on every show, although it was an issue. And there were other people that liked to pretend that Roman wasn't a great explosive babyface. Thing is, he was just miscast, was always the guy. Apart from one brief moment. Because as mentioned in the Wrestling Observer newsletter in August, Triple H had decided the Wyatt family should be the new bad guy heel group on the show, and that they should beat Roman, Dean Ambrose, and Seth Rollins. Which they did. You can see this on your TV. There was more here, however, because there was some bad blood too. Word has it that the Shield had roughed up The Undertaker and Randy Orton more than they should have done, so that meant they had to be moved downward for a while. Did happen too, so I assume there was some truth to it, but long term, meh, didn't make a difference at all. Rollins, Ambrose, and Reigns basically run wrestling right now. Number 11, 2014, and nobody wants the streak to end. The biggest moment of 2014 was at WrestleMania when Brock Lesnar defeated The Undertaker's undefeated streak. People genuinely could not believe it. Even now, it gets debated. Vince McMahon made the call on the day of the show as he thought Taker was done and didn't have many manias left. To be fair, he wasn't overly wrong. After this, it was a slow walk to retirement for Mark Calloway. He had given the industry everything. All it takes is a quick look through all the wrestling reports, though, and yeah, the majority viewpoint within WWE was that Dead Man losing was totally incorrect. They would have said something to Vince too, but that may have affected their job, so they didn't. That old chestnut. Even Steve Austin came out swiftly after the fact to say he didn't like it, which sort of sums it up. But look, man, this was 10 years ago. So if you are still worrying about it, I have some information for you. Just stop and go go get a real problem. Number 10, 2015, in that New Japan chat. Triple H clearly wanted to work with New Japan in 2015. Made sense as so many NXT recruits had come from there, so during NXT TakeOver Brooklyn, he booked Tyler Breeze versus Jushin Thunder Liger. It was really cool. I would guess Paul Levesque then wanted to open up communications, but then NJPW chairman Taki Kiani didn't want any of that, because he thought the game was up to no good. Specifically, he was furious that Triple H wanted to air some New Japan footage on the WWE network, because that meant only one thing. WWE could see what Japanese wrestlers did well in the ratings and snap them up. This was his thought process. To be fair to that guy, this was based in evidence because it was the exact strategy the WWF had taken during their national expansion. In the 80s, many territory stars were showcased on World Wrestling Federation television, and as soon as they got a liking to this new exposure, they signed up properly. That's why NJPW stopped it instantly and started their own plans to expand into the West. The irony being a few years later, AEW was born and basically did this anyway. Whoops. Number 9, 2016, and Daniel Bryan tries to get fired. When Daniel Bryan did retire in 2015, he didn't agree with the decision. It was a WWE choice, so right after this, he spent 2 years trying to get cleared. He did this on his own time too. He was desperate to get back in the ring. As Daniel did remain under contract, he was put back on TV as an authority figure. Before long, was also a part of Talking Smack. I think Bryan liked doing that. There was no script whatsoever. He also had great chemistry with the then Renee Young, which made this a must-see program, especially as Bryan reveled in the fact he could just take shots at WWE and his fellow superstars. Therefore, he asked AJ Styles about his flat feet based on some mad rumors regarding Styles' opinions on the flat earth theory, and had that now infamous on-air row with The Miz. He basically told him he was a crap wrestler. It did feel like Daniel didn't really care, and that's because he didn't. As he told Renee on her podcast in 2022, Bryan admitted he was so mad he wasn't allowed to wrestle or leave his contract, he figured he'd just try and get fired. At least then he'd be free. This is also why he said James Ellsworth had a huge hog. I'll let you figure that one out, but producers did tell him to stop, and Daniel said to them, "No, I don't think I will." Number 8, 2017, and Cody's predictions. The AEW versus WWE war today is out of control in many corners of the internet. The tribalism is unreal, as people forget how important both companies are. Makes for a better ecosystem. Even in 2017, there were hints when the Elite invaded Raw as part of their YouTube show Being the Elite. As there was no AEW, it was good for the Young Bucks and co because it got a lot of people talking, especially as we all get carried away. Maybe they are going to do something silly on the show itself. During this visit, they even snapped a pic with friend Jimmy Jacobs, which did the rounds after he posted it to Instagram. And yep, that led to him being let go, which is utterly bonkers. Turned out Cody knew the deal because, as Matthew and Nicholas Jackson talked about in their own autobiography, Rhodes said to them soon after this, "You do realize we're at war with them, right?" I'm sure they laughed it off at the time. Turns out he was spot on. Almost like he knew. Number 7, 2018, and the real reason the McMahon said sorry. This is still wild. Feels like a fever dream. But in December 2018, the McMahons realized the year in question had been terrible creatively, so came to the ring and apologized. Stephanie even said we hadn't been doing a good job lately, whereas Vince was a bit different. He didn't need any help from the audience. Sure. It soon became a story as all the heat was shifted onto Constable Baron Corbin, which was most unfair, because that guy was just doing his job. Talk about being thrown under the bus. His life was also likely impossible as he dealt with last-minute script changes and constantly changing narratives. Best part is it didn't help. 2019 weren't all that great either. If you are wondering why this changed and why it kind of felt like a road to nowhere, it is because, allegedly, the WWE thought they were about to sign some major talent and their arrival would be the "see, we told you." And then those people didn't join. It would of course have been the Elite who were in talks during this period before they all went and signed for AEW. Could be another reason there is bad blood here. The big apology angle had been burned into dust. All of it was dumb anyway. Don't say sorry, just get back to work and make it better. Number 6, 2019, and WWE's AEW fears. Everything changed in 2019. For the first time in almost 2 decades, WWE had proper competition again. They realized that business practices had to change after Shawn Spears asked for his release and went to AEW, and they can't have that. The perception would be people were jumping ship. Luke Harper was even told this by Triple H when he tried to do the same, and he even got offered a deal where if he stayed, he could work New Japan. Word is they said the same to Bryan Danielson too, although neither of these actually happened. FTR also wanted out the door, but they too were blocked, even though WWE COO George Barrios once said, "The last thing WWE wants is to lock guys up." Yeah, right. The Wrestling Observer went into this in the 15th of July issue because apparently everyone was seeing what the deal with AEW was, apart from Roman Reigns. Makes sense, he had the spot. Given how many wrestlers were being misused, however, no wonder they wanted a different opportunity somewhere else, and it helped those that did stay get all the money. Rumors suggest AJ Styles got a mega bump in pay when his contract was up. WWE even re-signed the likes of the Good Brothers under the guise of the fact that WWE will always be there, and then they fired them anyway. That was mean. It could have changed everything too, because as Styles' contract was coming due, AEW considered making their first big feud, the Elite versus the Bullet Club, which had kicked off in Japan, and AJ would have fit right into that. It never happened, but yeah, WWE knew this wasn't good, so they tried to close the door, because they knew. Of course they did. Number 5, 2020, and the challenge. How does a wrestling promotion get hot? This is the eternal question because it's what everybody wants. As once reported, it is not actually head. It is something AEW is dealing with in 2024 as they try to refine this fire. But as we were reminded in 2020, the secret solution sometimes is right there. The reason AEW was beating NXT during the Wednesday Night Wars is because it was a more interesting show. It was also going to different arenas, so when you combined the two, NXT looked like small fry. Even if that wasn't true, it became the perception. I mean, it was Dick Ebersole's knowledge of production which made the WWF look so massive in the 80s, and it's how New Japan became the number 2 company in the 2010s. If you tuned into any major event they had, all the fans were in this huge building. That was way better than a Ring of Honor or TNA. So sure, the return of Roman Reigns was a factor in WWE coming back, but the company also built the Thunderdome to combat the pandemic and just injected some life back into Raw and SmackDown. It worked. The numbers went back in the right direction because this was the opposite of the Performance Center. Because there, it felt like you were in a funeral. It underlines how important the look of your output is and how much energy can be produced. That usually translates through the screen, and ever since then, the WWE has been riding a wave. And if we're honest, I think it's a coincidence. Number 4, 2021, and the CM Punk negotiations. When CM Punk appeared on Ariel Helwani's MMA Hour, he dropped a right doozy. In 2021, before he decided to return with AEW, he was also chatting to WWE. Well, hot damn. It was sort of funny because when Punk did appear at The Last Dance, he made out like WWE was the bane of pro wrestling. Well, to be fair, he didn't go back there, and maybe that's why. CM Punk is also not the same person as Phil Brooks, although that does tie in. So many people gravitate towards this man because he feels so genuine. Part of his makeup. Ariel did ask about this, with Punk mostly shrugging his shoulders and saying he made a mistake by pandering to the internet crowd. Sheesh. He's now back where he belongs in the big leagues, helping to sell out crowds. I did find it wild though, as Punk in 2021 WWE feels totally alien, even more so as it was drawing Brock Lesnar's and Roman Reigns' dominance. Not sure he would have felt about that. Still, this did happen as revealed by the man himself. You honestly can never say never in wrestling. Number 3, 2022, and the weird re-signing of the Authors of Pain. Maybe we did this because it would be a good twist for a novel, but the Authors of Pain did indeed come back to the WWE in 2022 and didn't feature on TV until 2024. You tell me. They did join up with Karrion Kross's Final Testament crew, but as Sean Ross Sapp had Fightful reported, they had been hanging around for 2 years. I mean, I don't want to be that guy, but that sounds like easy work. It does tie into what Triple H decided to do when he got power of the company, which was to rehire everybody who got fired from NXT and kind of start again. Problem was, Vince McMahon then returned for a little bit, so anyone Hunter wanted to use was back in purgatory. I assume it would have been the same for someone like Dexter Lumis, but he had already made his way onto Raw before the change. But where else can you do nothing in your job for 24 months and kind of sit around and wait for a call? Tell you what, desperately want to know what they were being paid. Number 2, 2023, in the Ronda Rousey accusation, which is alleged, alright? There's the word, allegedly. Ronda did claim, though, that even if people said Vince McMahon was gone, he most definitely wasn't, as Bruce Pritchard was still with WWE. Therefore, Vince would have been running things through him, because Bruce is just an avatar for McMahon. This is what she said. There were also other reports from other outlets that between the TKO merger and his permanent departure, Vince was still overseeing things without being in the weeds. It's likely why we got Brock Lesnar versus Omos at WrestleMania 39. There were other tweaks which seemed suspicious when Ariel Emanuel made the call to give all the power to Triple H. It was the right move, but again, Rousey didn't believe this was totally true. I would assume now there's no way back because go to WrestleMania 40. The big hoo-ha was letting everybody know it was the Triple H era now, so nobody could even joke Vince was still around. I mean, they could have just said that out loud and we would have got it, The message was clear. Number 1, 2024, WWE is still WWE. More of this will come out soon, I promise you that, but at the moment it is all a lot of noise. Although still, it's very interesting noise. It all goes back to January when The Rock joined the company as part of the board, and within that deal agreed to work the main event of WrestleMania against Roman Reigns. This was strange because around the same time, Cody Rhodes won the Royal Rumble, and he wanted to face Roman too. He even pointed at him, so something was gonna give. It all led to that SmackDown where Rhodes came to the ring and willingly gave up his Mania 40 main event to the People's Champ, as Seth Rollins started telling Cody to face him instead. So we were actually going to change something we had been building for years. As we now know, a huge backlash happened which forced The Rock to turn heel, and in hindsight, all of this was gold. It was the best version of Rocky in ages, and it set up WrestleMania 41. The Rock pinned Cody Rhodes in that tag match. However, it does just show you that the thinking is very much the same, because 10 years before this, it was basically the same with Daniel Bryan. If we can avoid giving the fans what they want, we will. We're just gonna go with our MO. And hey, look, both of these worked out, so it's not all bad. We did get what we wanted. All I'm saying is just keep it in the back of your mind. So thank you very much for joining me on that journey, and make sure you like the video, share the video, and subscribe, and drop me a comment below, because maybe you know some secrets, and it's time to share them with the world. You can also click the video on the screen where I shall be talking about the Attitude Era, because everybody loves that, but otherwise I appreciate you, my friends, and I will talk to you again very, very soon.